Welcome everyone to episode 26 of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce. I'm your co-host Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm here with Tim. Tim's back from a slight hiatus from last week.
Yes, it's great to be back. I did miss an episode there, so sorry to all of our listeners and our fans. But I'm back, Timothy Peterson, and I want to make sure I give a shout out to our sponsor, Punch Out To Go. They are a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. And Punch Out To Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. And with their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for punch-out catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents. Thank you to our sponsor, and I'm going to throw it right back to you, Isaiah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Amir, our guest, who we're excited to announce, actually just mentioned he's just did some work with Punch Out To Go. So that's why we like them as a sponsor, because they seem to kind of like somehow end up in a lot of the big guests, course we ended up working with. So Amir, you have been with BigCommerce for a while now on the solution architecture team, which I believe kind of covers a little bit of the sales side, but also the technical side and some of the business side. I think we're getting into where you're like, we're really going beyond just the technical specs here. So tell us a little bit about that and your background, and we want to know more, obviously.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Isaiah and Timothy, for having me on. I'm one of the enterprise solutions engineers here at BigCommerce. Our job is really help merchants as they're going through the evaluation process of picking BigCommerce, really picking the technologies that accompany their commerce journey to make sure everything is right in the place that it needs to be. The data is communicating the way that is desired for them in terms of how their business operates and flows. So we are taking a more very solution approach to every project that we're on to make sure we're understanding what the needs are, how each business operates, so that way we can recommend how our software can fit better in that ecosystem, rather than just trying to throw a software at a specific problem that they might be running into. We also are a bridge between the product team at BigCommerce and what happens in the market, so that we can take back feedback that we hear to make sure that as we're developing our tools and new products that we're coming out into the market with as an open software as a service solution, we're staying relevant to what the market is asking for. What are the things that the most innovative retailers that we're working with, or B2B businesses that we're working with, are asking for.
Awesome. So you guys are very cross-department, which I think is important, right? Like you're working with a lot of different departments. So that's what I think is one of the biggest challenges of B2B e-commerce, is that it's super cross-department in terms of trying to make it successful. And I think that's why we call this the hard truth about B2B e-commerce. It's not like, oh, just buy BigCommerce or another solution and that's all you need to do. Like there's just, maybe let's start there. Like I think that's in some ways the biggest problem, is this change management, business requirements gathering process, and just the business side needs to kind of adapt to this new wave of e-commerce. And what are you seeing from that? And I'm curious also to see what the evolution, since you probably have started and now, like I'm sure you've seen kind of an evolution and a change in culture around that.
Yeah, I mean, I started like my e-commerce journey at a B2B company. It was a smaller business that sold the license plate papers to the car dealerships that sell cars in Texas. So we actually moved them from Yahoo Commerce to a BigCommerce store when I was the intern there with the rest of the intern team that we were working there with. So that was like really the very first kind of B2B real experience that I personally got to kind of go through. And it was really interesting because, and even then, but now even more with kind of going to different businesses and talking to them, it's really a shift of the buyers. So like you see more of that millennial generation, or like, I'll kind of talk a little bit smack about my own generation, but we're very, impatient. We need things a lot faster. So those folks are getting to the buying power. Those they're no longer the junior buyers; they're the senior buyers that are pressing the go button on the order. So, and that generation has grown up with the Amazon-like experiences, the quick and easy ways of the gratification of quickly buying something and being able to get that quickly. And although that's not the reality in a B2B business, a lot of the times, right, you have things on back order and you have to wait for things to be manufactured and so on and so forth. What we're trying to do, or what we're seeing, is that B2B businesses trying to adapt to that type of a shopping experience or shopping style that's very B2C oriented, but still needs the characteristics of the B2B function, right? Because you're not going to change your manufacturing workflows or how you actually are going to produce something specifically, but you still need to be able to communicate if things are delayed, or still be able to capture those funds and capture those payments, because that shopper is trying to give you the money. And if you're not allowing them to do that, they're going to go elsewhere.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think you're right. And I think a lot of it is that it's now that you have to adapt to the demand, and the demand wants fast, easy. If I have to call up and go through a bunch of people to figure out when I'm going to get the product or even buy the product, it could deter me from buying.
Yeah. I mean, the friction exists in the B2C world, but it's way bigger in the B2B world as people's lives are getting busier, and we have the pandemic to deal with and other things to think about.
I think one of the things you just said too. Well, first I have to comment on Yahoo Commerce. I heard you say that, because that's something that I worked on early in my e-commerce career too. Was setting people up in Yahoo and then later on bringing them out of it. Right. So
yeah,
that's quite a thing. But I did want to mention also, we've talked extensively on our podcasts about B2C. Versus B2B, and all of the different, similarities and the differences. And you really did, Amir, hit on something I think is a given now. I mean, really, the B2B experience is different, and it's more complicated kind of by its nature because of the number of ways in which customers might want to interact. And so kind of laying that all out, in a very serious way, in a very real way, is something that's tough. So I think it's what Isaiah was kind of saying at the head here. It's like that planning piece is so critical to make sure that you're getting everything set up in a way that's actually going to have a lot of value to the business and to the customer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like if you're going into this whole thing with saying, oh, we just need to update it, right? But not thinking about what this department in the organization is going to need, what sales is going to need versus what your services team is going to need. I think that's really important, because there are going to be specific things that these more custom built solutions, or more kind of black boxes, we call them, where you just bought this massive SAP system, or bought the ATG Oracle platform and have customized to the sky on it. There's going to be niche specifics that you need, that your processes depend on, or your employees depend on, that you need to make sure it's documented. Because the last thing you would want is making this new change and adaptation, and now you've missed an entire workflow that you needed, right? And that's when these types of projects kind of tend to expand and become bigger, because the scoping properly wasn't done in the beginning. And things maybe were missed, or just overlooked, or assumed that just because something was there before is going to be there again.
I think that's a big one. I love how you said, I assume because it was there before, it's going to happen again. And I think a lot of companies, especially as they mature, they have people, they have turnover. So one guy who built the original system or actually knew how it worked isn't there anymore. So now the new guy is trying to bring over the new, maybe he's trying to migrate to BigCommerce, and he thinks that something the old system does is just going to automatically work on BigCommerce, but he never told you guys that was even a thing. And then, halfway in the project, we've had this with clients. They're like, oh yeah, we needed to do this. And they're like, oh, we thought you knew that because it does it on our old website. It's like, well, I don't think people realize that you can't just look at a website and go through every possible use case of what it can do by just
Right.
looking at a website, like there's a lot that can go into it to even figure that all out. So some of that's behind the scenes, and you wouldn't know it unless you knew all the systems and the back, like the back office systems and things like that. So I think you're making a point. And I think what I'm kind of getting to is it's funny. One of my posts that actually did pretty well recently on LinkedIn, I was talking about how I think companies need to hire better e-commerce managers. Like the key, I call it the e-commerce manager, but it could be VP of e-commerce. But I think it needs to be a senior role, and you need someone. Me and Tim kind of did like our our slideshow on the Trellis learnings.
Yes.
What would you call it? Yeah. And the first or second point is like, you need the e-commerce manager.
Let's be somebody there. Yeah.
Totally.
Be cross department and go, okay, this is what operations need. This is what sales needs.
Mm-hmm.
When we take the order, this is what happened. Like they're making sure that all of this is thought out, because I think it has to come internally. Like, Trellis or BigCommerce, we can help them think through requirements, but we don't run their business, right? So we'll never know their operations as well as they do, right?
Yeah. To your point,
yeah,
we can try our best, and I personally have maybe spoken to 1,000 to 2,000 different merchants year to date so far.
wow.
And we have the knowledge of, I guess, what we were exposed to. We know all the workflows that people have shared with us, and the general B2B things that could potentially be. So, at BigCommerce, the sales engineering team, we go through a technical scoping exercise when we're going through this entire sales process, or the actual new project process, where we try to identify from the top of the funnel all the way to the bottom of the funnel of the customer going through the experience, but then also how it actually gets processed and shipped, and how you account for it in terms of the accounting. So we try to go through all the business steps, that from product curation all the way to you getting that item to the customer, to see if there is anything that you say in that process that could be different from other things that we've seen. That way we can address it early on. We can try to surface it early on, and hopefully through conversation and through people explaining how their businesses work, there are those critical things that they remember to mention or bring up as the conversation is happening.
Well, one thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amir.
No, that was it. Yeah.
No, because I think one thing I did see, and I think it actually is a BigCommerce document that I saw for another project that I was working on. It's fascinating. It basically laid out, I'll say, like an 80% likelihood of a business like doing these certain processes, saying, well, this is our experience. These are the things that we've seen. And then here are outlier things in all of these different directions that are processes. Tell us, are these things that you do, or that are priorities, or that are on your wish list in the next 18 months? And then going through that kind of a process. And that's extremely valuable because, as you said, you've been talked to like thousands, of people, and you have all of this data that you can just present back and say, well, here's the most common 80%, of things that really are done.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole handoff process between our pre-sales to post-sales teams, where we go through what we call the implementation discovery documents, where we answer questions to our implementation team, and we're responsible for knowing the things before we hand off this project essentially over for implementation. So a lot of the times, as the merchants are evaluating our platform, we're also evaluating the project to make sure it's a fit, and it's something that's going to have a good experience on both ends, because the last thing we want is a bad experience for a merchant, implementation wise, or post launch experiences, right? So we want to make sure that this is a smooth of a process, because migration is not easy, especially if you've been on something for 10 years or 15 years. And that's the case for a lot of the B2B merchants, that have been on Infor, or they've been on, Epicor, Eagle, and other things that are just stuck in their ways, kind of.
Yeah. Some of these ERPs, some of these B2B companies, and I think that's something I want to get into more, but we'll come back to the ERP side. But some of these, one of our guests, I think she said that the ERP had been built before she was alive, and she was She's like, I'm not the youngest guest here either. She was, she wasn't straight out of college, so it was, it was pretty funny how the way she explained that. But I'm curious, kind of going back to, it was really impressive that you've talked to such a large volume of merchants. Like, I'm kind of stealing, Tim, your favorite question, but and you can add to this, Tim. But I feel like we got to ask it now. It's like, out of those, let's call it 2,000 that you've talked to in the last 18 months, 24 months. What are some of the common things that you see them do well in the beginning towards the end, like the end result that's making them successful? Are there any similarities or patterns that you're noticing? Like the guys that are really doing well, they're getting on BigCommerce or a platform like BigCommerce, and they're actually getting it and growing with B2B eCommerce. Like, what are they doing that the guys, because I can imagine out of those 2,000, some are going to do really well and some aren't going to do as well as the others.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important when we talk about migrations or any sort of new implementations is starting from the data, because like I'm a very data oriented person. So I think especially in a large B2B business that has a decent size SKUs, customer information, product information, order information, instituting some sort of a source of truth that is going to be the driver of this business. So that way, when we're looking at the implementation, we know where the end all be all needs to be, and deciding that early on, making sure the data is very clean and has a good data hygiene in that environment, so that when you're going through the implementation process, you're not moving bad data around. Because as you move bad data around, now you're just ending up in this endless cleaning up cycle in every different platform that you're on, and it's just not fun for anybody. So that's one of the common things that we see. Like a lot of the automotive space it hurts from that, like heavily, especially with folks that are not using more standardized data sets like ACEs and PIs and such. So having data in place and really figured out is really important, I think. Doing that, we can help with the migration, but then it's really just about where it is today, where is it going to live moving forward, and who's going to be the source of truth, whether it's pricing, inventory wise. The other thing I would say is sometimes people tend to focus on design and aesthetics too much. Thank you.
I have I have a couple nightmare stories. Maybe we'll share some, a beer one time after COVID, hopefully. And I'm not going to get into the details on this, but sorry, I just had to say.
No, I mean, it's definitely, we've all been through it. It's that when we go through the experience, what we want to make sure people understand is that we're not talking about how this is going to look in terms of where it's sitting on the page or which way it's coming out of the side of the page. These are all things that can be configured, and these are all within the control of the merchant if they want. But what I want people to focus on is what is it actually going to get out? Like, what is the shopper going to get out of it if they were to go use that thing? How often is it being used? So if you have an existing site, I think one of the best things to do is running some heat mapping reports and see where do shoppers touch and what do they interact with? How far do they go down and read content? So kind of getting some sort of a survey out of your current existing user base, so that you're not, focusing on things that are not used by your shoppers or not really relevant to the functionality that you're looking to deliver.
I think B2B design is just different. Like, you don't need the flashy storytelling, parallax scrolling, like crazy design, or like this, it's good to have a good design, but I think what's most important is just good functional user experience. I can look through categories quickly, and a lot of that is data integrity, right? If your data is a mess, it's hard to get through the categories. So yeah, I totally agree, and that's why me and Tim tried to kind of like simplify our learnings from the podcast. And step one was let's say you got your e-commerce manager. Step pre-1 is get your e-commerce manager, pick your platform. Let's call it BigCommerce, right? Because obviously
that's it. Call BigCommerce.
Get your e-commerce manager, get the e-commerce, and then now you're on to step 1, which we say is product data. Like in theory, get your product data up on, like good product data up on BigCommerce, and you could have a fairly functioning B2B e-commerce website, at least be useful. You know, you can look at product data, you can kind of click around and find things, and it's not too hard to set up credit cards or, you know, other functionality to take payments. And then, then two, we say is integrations, because obviously if you don't integrate with the ERP and your own kind of like back office processes, then you're probably not going to be very efficient. So to me, like what I think people kind of mess up is they don't realize that just step one and step two and getting on the platform and all the other basics of like, you know, basic setting up payment gateway and all this stuff. It's not, it costs money. I mean, like you have to pay a service provider like Trellis, or you have to hire your own team. Like those costs can add up, and focus on step one and two, which is kind of like the operations of getting the site effective. And then we say like, step three is like maybe you can invest a little bit more, because I think what people don't realize with design is you can do incremental design improvements. So you can have, you know, there's a million, you know, nice BigCommerce themes on. Pick one that looks good, brand it. We can get that up and running super quick with good product data, and you probably will have a better site than what you have today.
And, you know, and the distinction I would make too is that, you know, we're talking mostly in this podcast about B2B e-commerce, right? So the design should be, you know, relatively simple and straightforward and frictionless and all of these things.
Exactly.
You know, good design still comes into play for, you know, the sales piece, the lead gen piece, you know, and the narrative storytelling really matters, but it's a different thing. Like people put these two together sometimes, and you've got to separate them out. You've got to make sure you have a very clear path, you know, in the B2B.
You can always invest in improving the design. Once you're on a platform like BigCommerce, we can incrementally launch new features, improve the theme. I mean, we have clients that are launching stuff every week and every month, and sometimes every day, the more aggressive ones. So we can make it better, and we can use heat mapping and tools to figure out what should get better based on data.
To your point, I think there's a lot of native things that are just there for you to start using. So for B2B specifically, like to your point, there's things that are there. If you are not doing this today, by default, you will have a better experience, because BigCommerce can give you a fully gated experience such that you have catalog available, but pricing is not exposed to anyone unless logged in. Or out of the box, we can deliver a different price point to Tim versus Isaiah, because, you know, you might be part of different tiers of customers and you need different types of pricing. So a lot of those stuff are pretty complex things that previously people paid a lot of money for, right? You might have spent, you know, $10,000, $15,000 customizing something that's not meant to do that, to essentially start behaving that way. And what I want to make sure that people who are not doing, or the business owners who are not online at all, right? They know that it's not a major project of a $500,000 to launch a B2B site. It could be much simpler, much quicker to market than the old ways that it used to be.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And while we're on this topic, I have to ask you this, because I want to make sure, you know, I want the BigCommerce folks to be happy, because we're grateful that you guys are on here. But what I think BigCommerce is a very interesting B2B platform, and just not as well known as it should be. That's why I was excited to have you guys on this. And Tim, I think we've talked a little bit about that. We've had some platform comparison conversations. So a lot of the common platforms that we're seeing in the B2B space, obviously the Magento of the world, you know, been around for a while, now owned by Adobe. Salesforce kind of snuck their way in. Like, I don't know how that happened.
Pretty crazy.
I'm still skeptical, by the way, but, you know, I'd love someone to convince me more of that and how useful it can be, but there's that. And then you have, you know, some of the legacy guys like SAP Hybris, but we don't see as many. I think less people are kind of going in that direction because they're so expensive and a little bit
That's the cost. It's not that they're terrible. That's just really expensive.
And you guys are, in my opinion, arguably the most unique position in B2B, because then you have, you know, the Oracle and those big guys that are kind of in some ways going away. And then you have some people that are sticking around who are doing pretty well, like Insight got bought by Episerver. So that's a little interesting. I don't know if you guys have seen much with that. And then And then, of course, we're actually even seeing some lower end B2B stuff with things like Shopify. And then there's you guys who you're kind of in some ways in this middle tier, definitely a little more enterprise than the Shopify of the world. And then, people, or at least Gartner still views you as slightly less enterprise than Magento. Whether that's true or not, what I want to hear is like, where do you guys, you guys just recently IPO'd, like, where do you guys think you guys should be on the map, and why are you guys maybe not as known as I think you should be in B2B e-commerce?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, we've had the B2B functionalities that BigCommerce, has and serves big clients with for many years. Like HD Supply has been on BigCommerce for quite a while, for example, and they have a fairly complex, B2B setup with us. Yeah. And the core of what we want to do is we want to make sure that you're able to do a hybrid website at the first, right? First, what we want to do is we want to allow you to be a merchant that sells direct to consumer, but we also want that experience with the customer grouping and the price list capabilities that are on the platform, so that you can also be able to do the B2B sales. So if you wanted to gate that experience, if you wanted to hide and show specific pricing, those are all available there for you. And then what we are able to do is through some of the partnerships that we have with Punch Out To Go and other partners, for example, really cater a suite of solutions that are much better suited for a business than SAP Hybris is, than a custom-built Magento implementation would be. Because when you look at the total cost in comparison to all of these different things, if you went with the black box of a Hybris, to Timothy's point, it would be an enormous project, or the Episerver Insights project, right? In comparison, BigCommerce is a fourth of the cost of the implementation, with additional tools and maybe Punch Out To Go and other things that you might need to implement to actually get what you need. So what I think the credit is not given to BigCommerce at times is because we're not necessarily we haven't been advertising it for many years yet, loudly that we are a very stable B2B platform, that we do serve B2B merchants, and we are kind of taking that approach a bit more. As we're winning more B2B businesses, I think we'll be able to kind of tell the market, tell those stories better to our audiences. And we did win some awards this year. So we just won 7 medals in the B2B Combine this year, and that was a pretty impressive thing in terms of the kind of recognition that the industry is starting to give the platform because of the implementations that's been happening. Like one of the really good B2B examples of BigCommerce is farmerboyag.com. A farm agriculture kind of a supply company out of Pennsylvania that I actually had a pleasure of working with, and a very massive project. They have ERPs involved. They have Punch Out To Go. They have all these other different moving parts of the business, and they have a construction part of the business. So this was one of the really awesome case studies that we were able to produce, essentially because of what the platform is capable of doing.
That's a great answer.
And we see all of those competitors that you mentioned. Like I've personally have gone up against Salesforce, CloudCraze. We've done. Magento is on a day in and day out basis. And I would say those types of platforms, and I'm not necessarily saying CloudCraze is the same bucket as Magento, but it's really the same story, is that you're tied to a very clunky experience where you have to work with development teams for any sort of change, upgrades, and patches. On the Magento side, CloudCraze has very more rigid and long dev cycles when you're actually going through looking for making sure any sort of implementation or developing a cartridge of what have you. And then really other platforms, as you look at, the more niche they become, the less functionality you will have in terms of the modern e-commerce experiences that you
and less of an ecosystem. I always think you have less, the more niche, it might be impossible to find a developer for some niche platform, so that's why I always caution, like if doesn't have a big community, you should be careful.
Yeah.
So is there just a quick question on this? Is there a piece of the the B2B market that BigCommerce isn't really focusing on? I mean, for example, like defense, government, education, healthcare. I mean, is there a piece of it that they're not really thinking about, or is it really just everything and they're just continuing to develop in all those directions?
So like we're not necessarily developing anything niche to a specific B2B segment. What we're looking to do is we want to give you 80% of the way that you need to do commerce in the B2B way. And that 20%, what that becomes niche for your sector of the business, what we want to bring in partners, technology partners, solutions that are doing that really well and integrate them to BigCommerce. So we're also taking the best in breed approach when it comes to B2B, just like with our A/B testing partners and other partners that we have in the space when it comes to fulfillment and shipping and payments and such. On the B2B end, we know that we're not going to be experts in very specific niche B2B thing for automotive. But what we can do is we can give people the engine that requires to do commerce. That's going to be simple for all the merchants that need to do transactions online. And then we can provide the mechanism for them to be able to use the basics of a B2B business, like, those special pricing, those needs that you need to kind of be more personalized to those specific shoppers. And then if it's something very niche, we can help them find a solution that services that specific segment, or work with an agency like Trellis, right, to either create a private app or a customization that needs to be done for them specifically.
So let's get into that a little bit more, because I think what people don't understand, why there's a couple things here. So why is your total cost of ownership potentially much lower than some of these other competitors? And that has to do with SaaS, and then that has to do with the capabilities of potentially building a custom private app and what that means. So can you talk a little bit about that and like what the value is of being I think you guys are a very unique SaaS in the B2B e-commerce space, because most of the other platforms aren't really a true SaaS, or they might market themselves as like a SaaS, but they have these kind of hidden, or not hidden, but the upgrade costs are, I think, a lot bigger than people might realize. I think that's also part of it, is that the true cost of ownership, people don't find out until 5 years later. They think they're like, oh, I bought the platform and they told me it was going to be this, and then it ends up being twice that after they go through 3 agencies and blame the agencies and blame the platform, blaming everyone else, and then it turns out, well, maybe you just chose the wrong platform. Well, there's a whole lot of reasons that could go wrong, but.
Yeah, and I mean, and if I had $1 for every time I'd come across that I'd help those people pay those debts back. But it's a very interesting topic that you bring up, because I think what was funny maybe 4 or 5 years, 2 years ago, 3 years ago that happened, Magento was bought by Adobe. And just about everybody started renaming their software as cloud, right? And that was just a big thing, because everybody needs to be named cloud. The cloud insinuates that upgrades are there, that you're not necessarily hosted on-prem. And meanwhile, it made the waters a little bit muddy. It's still, you can still identify, to your point, who's true SaaS and who's not true SaaS. BigCommerce is actually a true multi-tenant SaaS platform. So when we roll out a code update, it goes to all BigCommerce merchants immediately. So and we're constantly updating the platform. When we talk about the total cost, I think there's multiple layers of total cost. So the BigCommerce platform, not only we're a SaaS platform, but we're an open source SaaS platform. So I'm going to talk about what open part of that means in a second. But to explain the SaaS part, what that means is that we're going to be hosting the site all the way homepage through checkout, with the entirety of the backend and the databases on the BigCommerce servers. We're hosted on the Google Cloud, so we can run on a high availability server infrastructure and allow for any sort of peaks that shoppers might see without any sort of latency issues. If you wanted that type of server support and level of server maintenance, right, it could cost you quite a bit. It could cost you $1,000 a month hosting a Magento site. It could cost you $20,000 a month hosting a Magento site, depending on if you want a service level agreement or not. But BigCommerce on enterprise plans does offer a service level agreement. We guarantee our uptime to make sure that your site is always running and you don't have downtime. So that's one of the biggest things when we look at when we work with businesses that need a reliable tool to rely on, that have invested a lot in their infrastructure of their custom built solution, to make sure that doesn't go down. That a lot of the times creates peace of mind. Secondly, is the upgrades that you mentioned. So BigCommerce, we have 300, 400 engineers. I don't know the number exactly, but all these folks are constantly around the globe are looking after the platform 24/7. What you won't have with a custom build or a Magento solution, right? Unless you contract somebody out, unless you have an agency on retainer, you don't have somebody specifically looking after your site, making sure your servers are up and running, so on and so forth. And then the upgrades, right? Open source platform equates to new versions coming out every now and then. And if you want to have some fun, if you just Google Magento versions timeline, you can see a really nice graphic of how many versions there have been, probably even older than I've been alive. In terms of that's a joke, definitely, but you can see there's a lot of different updates and things that have gone through, and every time there is testing, there is making sure all the plugins are still working with that new version, making sure the security updates are all installed. With a platform like BigCommerce, you don't have any of that. So equate all of that time that an internal IT team might spend on backlog bugs and tickets to go through that upgrade, and see where else you can allocate that, right? What else could they be doing for the business that's actually revenue generating rather than not revenue generating, really, just making sure that the existing revenue stays in place.
So to summarize, basically with a true SaaS like BigCommerce, you're getting the actual platform itself, plus the hosting, plus the upgrades continuously, just for like one monthly fee, whatever their contract is. Obviously there's different tiers, so you could start small, but most of the people in this market that we're addressing is probably going to be more on the enterprise plans.
Yeah.
But still, I think very, very competitive in the market that you guys offer. So I think what people don't realize is that and I'm curious, you might not even be able to answer this, and I can't answer this. I mean, who else is really a true SaaS? I think the obvious answer is Shopify. I think we all agree. You and Shopify have a lot of similarities, and I think that's where there's also been some confusion in the market. Like, what's the difference? People always ask, what's the difference between BigCommerce and Shopify? And the simplest answer I have, at least for this target market, is BigCommerce is very much moving in the B2B direction, has a lot of B2B features, tiered pricing and all these things built in, and Shopify has basically none of that built in. You would need like an app for all these different things that would be built into BigCommerce. But aside from them, who else is really a true SaaS? Like, obviously Magento's not. I don't think SAP Hybris is. I haven't worked a ton with some of these other platforms, so I don't know for sure. Like cloud, Salesforce is sort of a SaaS, but it seems like I'm not really sure how the cloud.
Yeah, well, Salesforce has two products. There's the Commerce Cloud, which formerly known as Demandware, and that's not their B2B platform. That only does direct to consumer. And then there's the Cloud Craze software that they purchased as well, and that's their B2B tool. It's very similar to the structure of Demandware, somewhat SaaS. It's the rollouts and updates are based on the pod and the server that you actually get provisioned on when you purchase. So based on what pod you're provisioned on, that's when you get the updates, the most recent updates. To your point, Shopify is really the only other true SaaS platform that we compete with in the market. Magento, Adobe, they're packaging up Magento Cloud with New Relic and Fastly and AWS to make it sound like, but there's not really true.
That's a really good point, because I think you guys are the only true SaaS in the Gartner B2B, or was it Forrester? I can't remember. Forrester and Gartner are like the same to me.
Yeah.
In my head, well, hopefully they're not listening to this and like.
I was just gonna say, don't tell them that.
Yeah, I should say that. No, I'm never gonna get them as a client, But I think it was the most recent B2B e-commerce report, which
Forrester, yeah.
we're both on the general commerce report and the B2B one, which was big for you guys, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But you were the only, Shopify was not on the B2B one, correct?
Right.
It was,
right.
So you guys were the only true SaaS. That's what I'm trying to get across here. I know that it was kind of a lot of conversation to get to this point. That's why I think you guys are in such a unique position, because obviously SaaS is doing well. Obviously you guys are doing well. Shopify is doing well, but you're the only true SaaS in the B2B.
Yeah, and to give you the answer on what would be the difference between us and a platform like Shopify, it's not just that we're directing more towards the B2B. I think there's some fundamentals that a B2B business can't live with on a Shopify platform. And the first part is payments. When you're a B2B platform, your payments are different than regular businesses. You may not be able to use Shopify payments. And by not using Shopify payments, for every transaction, you're penalized by Shopify for not using that, for using authorize.net or something else that you might need to use. And that's a really big, takeaway. A percent of every sale could be decent, cut into a margin for somebody that's a B2B
That's a really
business.
good point, because a lot of B2B companies do, like, we get this all the time with RFPs and B2B. They're like, we have this payment gateway. We really want to stick with this payment gateway because maybe they have some deal with them, or there's some reason, that. So
offline reasons. I think there's a lot of things that they do in their ERP systems that those gateways are connected at the ERP level. And sometimes, the CFO is getting a really, really good rate, and there's no way that they're going to budge on that, right? And that's totally fine with us. The other part is the flexibility of the platform. So BigCommerce, being an open SaaS platform, allows you to completely modify the homepage through checkout experience when it comes to the front end. That includes checkout, so that for a lot of the B2B businesses, there's some ways you might need approvals. You might need to integrate DocuSign, because you need, some sort of a signature before an order is placed. Right?
Also like hybrid, where they might need a B2C checkout version, and then they have a B2B. It's all the same site, which you could do in theory, where the B2B users might have a differend checkout experience. So that's possible in BigCommerce.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
And then I was going to add one more thing, and is the level of the communication that our APIs is able to communicate. So a B2B business needs, might have a large catalog. And when we talk about a large catalog, 60,000 products in a matter of couple of seconds is really much better than it taking 10, 20, 15 minutes for it to sync. And the BigCommerce API is able to advertise, and I say advertise because we don't want to overpromise anything or kind of say anything that our legal team doesn't approve. But 400 calls per second that we can support through the API. Whereas if you were to look at a Shopify platform on Shopify Plus, you get 4 calls per second, right? And that's the matter of minutes to hours of updating sets of products, downloading orders, that type of stuff.
And you're going to need a lot of API integration generally with a B2B site.
Yeah, I just had one little comment in here too. I mean, in B2C, a lot of times a very small business or a very young business may go directly to Shopify, because you get that template and off you go. Is there really a business that's too small in B2B e-commerce for BigCommerce, right? So it's because I certainly understand it well enough to know to recommend it to a lot of folks that I've worked with, but is there sort of a cutoff point where it's like, maybe it's not the right answer yet? Or, what would you say to somebody that's like a really small B2B player wanting to, just get out there?
Yeah, I mean, BigCommerce, very similar to Shopify. We have our retail plans. We call them Essential, BigCommerce Essentials. You can go and sign up, and at our Pro plan, you can have some of the B2B capabilities that our enterprise tooling has, and be up and running within a matter of days. So whether it's B2B, B2C, the platform is intuitive enough, very easy to use, quick to launch, that you can do that whether you're B2B or B2C. And the good thing about BigCommerce is if you are a B2B, if you don't think you're a large business that you need an enterprise plan or if you just don't want to talk to us at all and you just want to go do it yourself, you're more than welcome to sign up for the Plus Pro plans and use the software to start your business, get up and running to where you're having some sort of sales. Whereas like a Shopify, not only you need the platform, but you also need another $200 app plus another $100 app plus another $200 app.
People don't realize those apps can really add up. If we've seen companies that and also I think people don't realize having a lot of apps can be somewhat risky. So that's the nice thing about BigCommerce is it does more out of the box. You don't usually need as many apps, which is actually really good for growth and scalability. So, but
you still are going to use your email marketing apps and those other things that we don't intentionally do, right? But to your point, there's a lot more built in that you don't need those nuances that just should be part of the platform.
Yeah, Tim, a good story around being small. There was a company that wanted to work with us for B2B eCommerce. They ended up actually doing it themselves. They were using BigCommerce and they ran into some limitations, but they weren't really limitations. They just didn't know how to get through them. And they asked me for advice on other options of what they should do. And I explained to them the total cost of the other options. And they were like, oh, okay, we're gonna stay with BigCommerce. They quickly realized, I was like, you can get past these. These aren't most limitations are perceived limitations. You can figure out a way, like you were saying with the open SaaS model and using apps and getting creative, there's usually a way, or almost always a way to get what you want.
So, yeah, and I always tell people, if you run into something, ask us. We're here to help. We have 24/7 technical support from Austin. We're not going to send you, elsewhere to another company to answer your questions. These are BigCommerce employees that we train. So, ask us. We're happy to help. If we can help, we'd love to.
So I have a future-oriented question, really about innovation processes, because I know you guys are, really always moving forward, right? I mean, we all are. So what's the feedback loop like with all of these, the community of people who use, BigCommerce? How are you getting their feedback in, and how are you acting on it, and how does that really work?
Yeah, we do an exercise every year. It's called the voice of prospect, customer, and partner. So we every team that interacts with these different communities that we work with, we try to collect information. So our client success team collects the voice of the customer. So these are active merchants that our account management team works with the enterprise customers and the technical support folks that we have on the lines, try to solicit information and feedback from folks over the phone and the surveys that we gather, and the heads of the client success team kind of compile that and boil that down to specifics, the number of the times things have been asked. And on the same side, we also have the community ideas area where we have folks in the community able to submit ideas. People can vote on those, and we take a look at those pretty heavily. And then from the partner standpoint, technology and agency partners, we have the partner advisory boards where I believe you guys are part of that.
Yeah, we are. I wasn't sure. I didn't know if we were allowed to disclose that or not. I didn't want to.
Very exciting.
Well, if we're not, we might have to cut that out.
Yeah, I don't know the rules, so I just don't want to break any rules. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I honestly don't know if there is I don't believe that's a secret. I believe it's okay to share. I think it's okay to share that we collect feedback from our partners, because we do. We really care about folks that are implementing the platform, and then vice versa. How our platform integrates with other solutions and how people want to integrate with our solution. So we want to hear that, and then the voice of the prospect. So people that we're active conversations with. That's the job of the sales engineering team to make sure that we're hearing what the market wants. What every deal that we're going into, what are the things that they're trying to do, and then hopefully be able to convey that and boil that all down into the product summit that we do every year to essentially come up with the following year roadmap and priorities.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Tim, because that was a great question, Tim, and I've been really impressed with BigCommerce willingness to listen to us as an agency, and it just shows to me that they're willing they're very like open to criticism and trying to get better as a platform. And I think they're one of the few platforms where like, if you voice a concern, they'll like, even their CEO Brett will like be like, hey, like we're trying to solve that. Like, I hear you.
I love hearing that. I really do. It's necessary. It's not just something that I really enjoy. It really is necessary. How else are we going to, continue to be ahead? And how are you going to be ahead as a company, right? So I'm really happy to hear all that.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with that. I can speak personally, at a high level, assuming that that it's pretty cool when Trellis, we're not a huge company, we're a little over 60 people. It's pretty cool when I can like talk to the CEO and be like, hey, here's some things that we think you guys should work on, and he's like, yeah, that's a good, like he just like, yeah, that's a good idea. Like we're some of the stuff he's like, yeah, we're already working on that, and some of it's like, hey, like what, like can you get me more information? We need help like figuring that out. Like he's literally like very open from my experience to, and, it's, I'm probably not going to be able to talk to the CEO of SAP or Adobe or Salesforce. Maybe one day, not right now. Not
too often. Maybe not right now.
I'll give them my cell phone number. I'll see if they'll call me after the podcast.
They're listening, right?
Yeah, it's pretty great. I mean, so one last thing I had for you, just as in the back of my mind, is so do you see anything, Amir, that you want to tell our listeners? It's really like a big thing that's coming up in the next few years that people really haven't thought too much about yet, or just anything in B2B e-commerce, a trend or something you want people to have in mind?
I think the B2B commerce side, we have plenty of ways to go in terms of kind of just getting everybody to where they need to be, right? Before we start innovating more, and I'm sure there's going to be more innovation that's going to come about, but I don't know if I don't necessarily like foresee B2B commerce to like have that much VR and AR, or I'm not going to necessarily say that, but maybe voice, maybe having some sort of voice integration at some point could be the future, but it's really hard. Because the B2C world, right, the pandemic brought us 10 years forward immediately in terms of how humans we shop, right? And then with the internet, the B2B world has really moved forward a lot, where you had in-person sales a lot, right? And now everybody is Zooming and maybe standing from a truck and selling a product. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a shift in terms of what those field sales reps were doing. Maybe I think the bigger innovation needs to be there, because a lot of those in-person things aren't happening anymore. So, or maybe once we're through the pandemic, things would change. But who knows? Kind of in terms of what that's going to look like. But I think there's a lot of B2B businesses that are still not online, right? That are still relying on the lead gen through the phone calls, or they're still doing emails. They don't have a way of doing quotes online, or just capturing those interests that might be hitting their websites. They see the visits on the site, but they're not capturing any of that. And I think
happening. They're not getting any.
Yeah, like there's a lot of money left on the table for a lot of those businesses that just with simple updates and quick changes, they could just be capturing more leads. And 10 new leads, one of them converts. That's one new customer that you didn't have before.
Yeah, I agree in that. I think, Tim, a lot of companies in our we really need to brand this 5-step program, which I realize we want to.
We do.
Step 4 is more about payment flexibility. We should probably add shipping as part of that. But I was just looking back at it the other day, because shipping and payment kind of go hand in hand.
Yep, they do.
But I really think that a lot of B2B companies still just need to focus on step 1 and 2, which is get your product data in a good spot on a platform, which can definitely be done on BigCommerce for a reasonable amount. And step 2 is getting those integrations to the ERP or whatever else. And I think there's just still like so much work to be done on those 2 steps in the next few years.
Well, we'll invite you back in 2023, and then we're going to project forward. How about that?
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, some of the payments pieces and the step 4 and 5 somewhat figured out, right? It's just that not a lot of people are using them yet, right? Because they're just
punch out to go.
Haven't been able to. Yeah, and a lot of the B2B businesses, like especially more traditional ones that we come across, they're struggling with getting their audience to actually just adapt to this new way, right? And they're still picking up the phone and calling them, or they still want to fax the order, and there's also like the adaption of the technology as well, which I don't know how fast it's gonna.
Tim, I think you spoke to that really well a while back. I forget which podcast, about the sales reps needing to be advocates and training their customers.
Yes.
Yeah. Huge.
Can you
very
just
important.
touch on that real quick? I know we're kind of going over a little bit, but
no, that's fine. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, there are always a couple components where people really need to be, thinking ahead and then it helps the rest of the business advance. And as Isaiah is pointing out, the sales people, the sales reps, who are working in B2B, they need to be advocates for process change, and they have to understand too that they're benefiting from the process change tremendously, and then they bring it out to their customers. I mean, I'll tell you something that is hilariously futuristic but real that I heard about just this past week. It is a sales process, and this ties in with AR/VR actually, but it's a B2B sales process where it's hologram sales visits, holograms.
That's
right?
Awesome.
So, I mean, imagine it's basically Star Wars for real, where you're doing your sales meeting in miniature on a desktop in front of somebody. And it's astounding, but these are the kinds of things that people are doing. And if it's engaging enough and it works well enough, then of course people are going to adopt it, and everybody will have to figure out what that means. But it really is like every piece of that process, the salesperson has got to realize that, there's no reason not to try these things out for their benefit, and also to communicate the sales benefit to the customer about all these process changes and how much more they can get done. It's a loop.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Not just technology. It's a greater, and that's why I think it's a little bit of a slower, harder transition in B2B. The hard truth about B2B.
Exactly.
Like you said, with retail, it's just like you get along. It kind of fulfills itself in a lot of ways, especially with the pandemic. Whereas B2B, it's not quite that simple. Just building it isn't enough. You have to. People that are still ordering on fax, you got to convert them over.
Exactly. Well, this has been a blast. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think our listeners are going to love it too.
Absolutely.
This is really a lot of fun.
I think we're going to get a lot of hits on this one. So
I think so.
Yeah, I know everyone's got to get to their next meetings, but this was awesome. Thank you so much, Amir. And
thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
You're the best. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Nothing really. I just wanted to say thank you guys for being a great partner. We really enjoy working with a partner like yourself. And really, what I want to make sure people take away from this call is that we want to make sure that the platform is right for you. If BigCommerce is an option that you're looking for, we're not looking to just take on clients just because we say we're a B2B platform. We want to show you how it works, and we'd love to get a chance to talk with you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you.
Awesome.